If you arrived in the United States today, you might see problems, things you think the government ought to fix. But there's one you probably wouldn't spot that has a lot of Americans really very anxious and angry. It's immigration. In this country of immigrants, people are getting increasingly upset about the number of people who are arriving uninvited. Thousands coming every day across the southern border with Mexico, 2 million people a year. And if you were in one of the southern states, like Texas, on a farm, a ranch, or in a town, you might see the inundation yourself, because it's really dangerous and it's really difficult, but thousands of people are walking into this country to start new lives here every day. Gil Kowski was the commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and he was in charge of trying to do something about this. How bad was it? How bad is it now?
Well, one, we have to look at it from a global perspective. There are 10 million people right now in some type of migration status. So it doesn't matter whether it's Italy or Greece or the United Kingdom or France or the United States. So the numbers have certainly increased in the last several years on our southern border with Mexico, but also what has increased have been the people from countries. During the past, it was people from Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Now it is people from China, India, Venezuela, Brazil, Ecuador, and on and on. The United States has become a destination, and the danger is much more to them as far as trying to make a dangerous trek than it is to the United States.
I just want to get across this idea of how new this seems to be, because it's not new. Illegal immigration, undocumented people coming across the border without permission goes back years, decades in this country. But if you look at the numbers for what are officially called encounters, which is uniformed personnel, people who work for Customs and Border Protection or other agencies actually encountering these people, there seems to be a very sudden spike. Why is that?
So the number that has increased was from over 1 million people, and 1 million people was pretty standard, whether it was President Bush, President Obama, President Trump, etc. But these last several years, that number has increased significantly, up to 2.5 million people in the last year. And that is, I mean, the United States is clearly a destination for safety, security, economic improvement, and education for families. And of course, the people fleeing these countries are probably the people that you want them to stay in their country the most if you were a president, because they're the people that are risk takers. They're the people that are questing for a better life. The other part, of course, is that immigration is a law passed by Congress. It has not been touched in 30 years, even though there have been several attempts, one just a couple months ago and one several years ago, several attempts to get Congress to fix our pretty antiquated, outdated immigration laws, and Congress has failed to do it. So all of this ends up falling on the backs of any administration, Republican or Democrat.
The way you put it, it almost sounds like a manufactured crisis, because we've known these people were coming. Industry is giving them jobs. That's why they're coming. And though it may be illegal, very few businesses get prosecuted for hiring people who don't have permission to be in this country. And the courts, which are supposed to adjudicate their status and give them permission or send them home, are underfunded. There's a massive backlog. It sounds like if things were different, the United States could handle this.
Well, I think if things were different, the United States could handle some of this because, frankly, work is not going to get done. These are jobs that many Americans do not take, whether it's in a meatpacking plant or whether it's landscaping, et cetera. And you can go to almost any city and look at the construction that might be going on, and there'll be people from a variety of countries doing that. The system for claiming asylum and making a decision is backlogged by well over 1 million cases. And so that's a significant problem also. And you talk about, there is a law that said, look, if you're a company in the United States and you hire someone who is not here legally, you can be prosecuted. But that doesn't seem to happen particularly at a high level. And some of that is that Congress has denied funding for the Department of Homeland Security, who's responsible for that enforcement.
Now, Donald Trump says build a wall. Is that good policy? Is it good politics?
Well, I think we know from going back many years, and there's lots of walls. I mean, there were 400 miles of barriers along our southwest border when I was commissioner. But as a former DHS Homeland Security Commissioner and former governor of Arizona said, Janet Napolitano, if you show me a 30-foot wall, I'll show you a 31-foot ladder.
Do the Democrats have any better idea?
I think that the idea would be that, and it's not a Democrat or Republican, is that Congress should address this by making changes in the law. And Congress, the Republicans would like to use this as a cudgel, particularly during the election cycle here, to beat up the Democrats. The Democrats would like to keep the issue of having much more access to borders. But just recently, given these numbers, the Democrats decided to give up all of their requests for bipartisan legislation and just look to increasing the number of Border Patrol agents, the amount of money for the Department of Homeland Security, and to try and address this. Unfortunately, as happened in the past, the United States Senate passed a bill, a comprehensive bill, that would do these things. And when it went to the House of Representatives most recently, it did not pass after President Trump said resist it. It's very clear that President Trump would like to use this as a way to go after Democrats. But, you know, the fault lies really with not changing the law.
Just to be clear about this, and without being too partisan, the Republicans don't like the people who are coming across, but they like the problem because they think it will help them win the election. Well,
they want to use this, the 2.5 million people coming through. They want to use this, and that's very clear.
Gil Kowski, former commissioner of Customs and Border Protection. Immigration attorney Pamela Penado has a different perspective, the perspective of the men, the women, the families she's trying to help. And it is men and women and children coming across the border, upending their lives to leave their homes, risking their lives often in the journey. And then they come to the United States and something else begins. Can you tell us about the process, about the ordeal that they face when they get here?
Well, yeah, I mean, the journey begins and it can take weeks, months, right, for them to finally make it to the United States. And once they do, some of them are able to speak to an officer. They have what's called a credible fear interview, and they get issued a hearing notice, and they're able to go on their way. Now, most of them, they get detained, right? And they get detained for a prolonged period of time. They are decided if they want to give them parole or they want to release them on bond, and then they can be on their way. But most of them stay there for such a long time that they do end up signing their deportation orders.
But they end up as prisoners in the United States.
That is correct.
What goes through their minds? I mean, someone who comes to the United States either fleeing persecution or simply with ambitions about getting out of miserable poverty. What do they go through when the first thing that happens is they're confined?
Yeah, it's very disheartening when I have these conversations with them. You know, they're just very confused. They don't know what's going on. They don't know when they're going to be able to speak to someone. They do complain about the conditions in the detention centers, about the mistreatment. So, you know, it's very sad. The stories are very sad.
Do they have any idea how unpopular they are among some Americans? Not all Americans, but a lot of Americans don't want them here.
I do hear the complaints, right, from some of the immigrants that are in the United States. I mean, they say, listen, I've been here for 20 years, 30 years, and I cannot get an employment card. right? And the process is, if somebody comes across the United States and they seek asylum, they can get an employment card while they wait for that asylum hearing date, which can take years. So, it's sort of like, okay, these individuals that recently entered, they get an employment card, and we've been here for a long time, built a life here, and we can't. But I don't think that the folks coming in, right, they're aware of these sentiments, but it is there.
Some countries take in a whole lot more people than the United States does relative to the size of their own populations or their own economies. Geography sometimes leaves them no choice, but you think about Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. Are those examples of the United States maybe could be a bit more charitable given how affluent this country is, or are they in fact examples that work against this because Americans look at those countries and don't want the United States to turn into anything like Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan?
I don't know how the government sees it, right? Whether they see these other countries are being good or bad, but I just know that immigrants are good, right? Immigrants are good for this country. Diversity is good. So, I think just treating everyone with dignity, allowing them to have a process, allowing them to be able to have their cases heard, I think it's a good thing.
Is the system a good system? I mean, you're trying to help them. What's it like for you?
It's very difficult. I mean, you're dealing with immigration, and there's really, with a lot of these cases, it's not like you can call someone, right, an officer, or speak to them and see what's going on with the case. I mean, most of the times I get calls and they're like, hey, my uncle, my dad got detained. What's going on? And it's very difficult to know because you can't just call someone and say, what's going on with this individual? Have they had their credible fear interview? Why are you detaining them for a prolonged period of time? So there's a lot of a gray area and a lot of unknown, especially if you don't have an attorney.
Inevitably, these stories are heartrending. These are the lives of people, of families that are never going to be the same. But in addition to that, there is politics on top of it. How much harder is this going to be for you? How much harder do you think it's going to be for the people involved? Because this is an election year, and it's now going to become a political issue even more than it has been in the past.
Right. I mean, immigration is federal law, so it all depends on our government at the time. And with this election coming up, a lot of people are afraid, right? Because they don't know what's going to happen. I think depending on who becomes president in November, I think we're going to see things change drastically.
It's interesting you say that because Donald Trump said build a wall, and a lot of people feel Joe Biden doesn't really know what to say, and the Democrats don't really have any answers for this that's dramatically different or better than the Republicans. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is a broken system. And I think, each side, they have their own agenda and that's what they're going to push forward. And in the meantime, right, you may have a side that may want to help, but there is just such a big mess in this immigration field that a lot of people feel like they're not being represented, right? Like I mentioned, there's a lot of folks that have been here for 20, 30 years, and they're like, when am I going to get an employment card, right? And then there's another side that, they may say, we're going to stop all these immigrants from coming forward. We're going to deport all the immigrants that are here. So either way, it's just a lot of chaos, and it's a lot of sadness, and it's very difficult for us immigration attorneys.
Is this unavoidable? Is the United States so rich, so stable, with so much empty space? Is it inevitable that this country is going to be a magnet for as long as we can see for millions of people who are fleeing misery in their own home countries?
I think the United States, it's a wonderful country. I'm grateful to be here. And I see that, other immigrants, they view it as such. They view it as, I want to be in the United States. They have so many opportunities there. They, most individuals are safe in their homes, right? And I think that a lot of these countries, they should focus on providing more opportunities, right? Providing protection. Because right now I see it that a lot of immigrants, and me myself being an immigrant, right? Even when I was a child living in the Dominican Republic, I saw the United States as, the place to be, the place where you can prosper, where you can be safe, where you can raise a family. So, the United States, it's a wonderful country. It has a lot of opportunities. And I think a lot of individuals from different countries, this is their dream to live here.
But how unlikely, how ironic is it that this nation of immigrants should find itself so unable to agree on what to do about immigration?
Mm-hmm. That's just government, right? There's always one side battling the other, the checks and balances. And, I just hope we can all come into some sort of agreement, right? To make the process for legal immigration, to make it more streamlined and make it more easier for folks to be able to come here, through some type of process, instead of, if you're applying for someone, if you're applying for a sister or a brother, that can take 20, 30 years for them to come. And if you're applying for a visitor visa, it's very difficult to even get a visitor visa to come to the United States. So I'm just hoping that some of these processes sort of get streamlined and get dealt with, and we can figure out a way to get legal immigration to work better for us.
Pamela Penado, thanks so much for talking to us.